Hello and welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, York Dore. This episode presented by the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water. The Well is a coffee house with a mission to bring clean water to the world. To date, over 30 communities across the globe have access to safe water, health, and hope. You can also make an impact by visiting a Well Coffee House today. There are 5 locations to serve you in the Nashville area. Those are in Brentwood, Green Hills, downtown, Bellevue, and Cool Springs Lifeway. More info can be found at wellcoffeehouse.org. The Well Coffee House, where coffee changes lives. We thank our co-sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center, which is located in the Gulch. Today's news sponsored by Sutherland and Belk, a local injury law firm committed to helping those who've been in accidents. If you or someone you know has been in a wreck or another accident, reach out to Sutherland and Belk and see what your rights are. You can find their contact info online at sbinjurylaw.com. Well, Vanderbilt signee Trey Fletcher has signed with the St. Louis Cardinals. The second-round pick had reclassified from 2019 to 2020, signed overslot. He is the third Commodore recruit to sign with a major league team in this class. Our guest line, presented by Boll & Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on Boll & Branch sheets for years. They're amazing, and you should get them too. They are fair trade certified. That means they've been made under safe conditions by men and women who were treated and paid fairly. Try them for a month. You can return them at any time at that point, but you will not want to. Once you have the sheets, get the mattress. That was voted best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That is spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy. Get $50 off your first set of sheets. York Dore is with us now. My friend, lots has happened since you and I last spoke. A few players have signed out of high school rather than come to Vanderbilt. The Commodores have advanced to Omaha. I hope you are doing well. Thank you for joining us. We have lots to talk about today. We're going to spend most of our time in the mailbag, but I'm just going to let you go with your thoughts first on anything you'd like to discuss before we go there.
Yeah, just that I think everyone kind of regretted not seeing the Oklahoma State fall series and Kumar's performance there. And we got to see it for 9 full innings on Saturday, and that was just something else. You know, I'm watching from New York. I stood for the last 2 innings, not sitting on the couch. What a performance! You know, what stuff, and what a moment! You know, rising to the occasion. If anyone had any doubt about whether or not Kumar Rocker can handle the pressure, rise to the occasion, you know, any thought of any doubt just went away on Saturday. And, you know, with that performance, I think a lot of pressure came off this team. You know, Mason went out, struck out the side in the first. Marty and DeMarco just go off, and suddenly you look up, it's 4-0. And I don't think anyone had a doubt as to what was to come. So just a spectacular performance. You know, Friday was the ugly wart of this Vanderbilt squad rearing its head. That, you know, you worry, is there a scenario where Vanderbilt's pitching will just sort of implode and no one can throw a strike, and the next thing you look up and it's a big inning? And this is the third or fourth time we've seen it this year. We saw it at Arkansas. We saw it at Texas A&M. We saw it, I guess, was it the TCU game in the opening weekend, Chris?
Correct. Yeah, that's when Kumar just had a really hard time locating anything, and it was not pretty that day.
Yeah, so, you know, we've seen it 3 times, and I think we were fortunate in that, you know, Corbs identified it early, went to AJ relatively quickly, which meant Hugh could come back on Sunday if needed. As it turns out, Kumar and then Mason and the Bats made sure that a deep roster of relievers was not needed on Saturday or Sunday. But it's the worry, and you worry about it more, I think, in a regional context, where had this happened in game 1 of the regional, Vanderbilt would have been in really rough shape, because pitching is at more of a premium. If you lose one of your first 2 games, in a regional versus a super regional where you just got to get through 27 innings plus any extras, or in Omaha where you have a game separating your first couple of games, your first 3 games, you have a day in between. I could be wrong on that, but there's less stress on the arms outside of the regional, and we were able to weather it. But this was the concern about this team, that you could have elite talent arms and elite bats and elite defense, but if you have a day where the staff just can't throw a strike, it could derail it all. And credit to the team, credit to Corbs, keep calm and Corbin on, as we say, and credit to to the Vandy boys in general and to Kumar for getting themselves righted and really coming back. So I think some people took some shots at Aaron Fitt because he said this was one of his concerns, that Vanderbilt could sort of implode. And to be frank, that's the same concern I had pretty much all season until the end. And one of the reasons why I sort of had pegged us as not having any separation from Mississippi State in determining who was the best team in the SEC. I don't honestly buy into Arkansas fully. I know they're sort of the next team. Well, now that Georgia's been eliminated, Arkansas would be the next best team. But I think Vanderbilt and Mississippi State were pretty clearly the 2 best teams in the SEC. But I wasn't convinced until, winning 30 of 32, we'll do some convincing for you, that Vanderbilt was distinctly better than Mississippi State until recently. And the principal reason for that was the worry about strike throwing. But as the team has, as Corpse has started to tighten the grip on who's actually throwing core innings out of the bullpen, with that fundamentally being Ethan Small and Tyler Brown from the right-hand side, Jake Eater, Hugh Fisher, Zach King from the left-hand side. It's become a little more controlled. There are less issues with, sort of these train wreck innings that we've seen. And while none of those pitchers are perfect, Tyler's had 2 outings where he's gotten roughed up a bit, including one in the regional, I believe. And is that right, Chris? Was it the regional where he got touched up?
Yes, it was game 2 of the regional. They had the 8-1 lead, and then he gave up 4 on that Saturday night against Indiana State.
And interestingly on that, we'll return to a second, but there was a bit about pitch tipping, and we'll come back to that in a second. But, Tyler's had a couple bad outings. Zach, as was the case last year, occasionally can't throw a strike, or occasionally he misses in and hits a batter. Jake Eater's actually been remarkably consistent since the first month of the season, and really has been very solid, even though some days he pitches as a 2-seamer throwing around 90, and some days he pitches as a 4-seamer throwing around 95. So you've got a little Jekyll and Hyde as to what pitcher you're facing. But he's really been pretty darn good. Ethan Smith has been really good, with the exception of some instances where he sometimes, I think, gets a little too hyped up and can sort of move from being effectively wild to being ineffectively wild. But he hasn't really had any outings where that really bore out to damage, because I think Corbs has had a little bit tighter of a leash with him. Hugh Fisher had maybe 2 innings where he really hasn't had it. One of those instances was obviously game 1 of the Super Regional, but he's been remarkably consistent. And who am I missing?
You mentioned Eater, you mentioned Fisher, Brown, Smith. I mean, that's other than Zach King, who's the 5th guy in that bunch. I think that's it. And Patrick Raby, whatever you do with Patrick Raby. So,
and I think that's an important point to note. I would assume at this point that Mason Hickman is the 3rd starter. That's certainly the impression that would have been received from the regionals and the supers. But what a luxury to have Raby coming out of the pen, or if needed, if we're in the losers bracket, to be able to have a 4th starter. And before we get back to pitch tipping, one of the most interesting and cool factoids about this team is we've got Drake Fellows at 12-1, Kumar Rocker at 10-5. Patrick Raby at 10-1, and then Mason Hickman at 8-0. It's not impossible to imagine Hickman getting 2 more wins. And based on a quick cursory glance, I would not surprise me if no college baseball team has ever had 4 10-game winners. Best I could find, Oregon State's had a couple of 3-game winners. Obviously, Vanderbilt this year has. And I would guess that you'll find, as many as 10 different teams that have gotten to 3. But it would not shock me if no team has had a 4 10-game winners in one season.
Wow, that is crazy. I had not noticed that. So I have a funny story. I was talking to a neighbor of mine last night who follows Vanderbilt baseball, and especially this time of the year. And he was at a convention for work in the Opryland Hotel. And he said we had an open bar and everything. He said I specifically had one drink because my plan was to go back to the room right before game time and watch that whole game because I really wanted to see Kumar Rocker pitch. So he has his drink. He goes to his room. He lies down on his bed, and he wakes up. It's 3:30 in the morning. He realizes he's fallen asleep without seeing a pitch. And then he says, well, I go on Twitter to see what I'd missed. And I just joked with him. I said, I think of all the games I have ever seen, that would be the one that I might regret missing the most if I had missed it.
Yeah, and I mean, after the game, the first thing I thought of was what on earth was the game score on that? And I ran it out, and I actually don't know exactly how it's calculated, but I came out with either 104 or it was either 103 or 104 or 104 or 105, depending on whether or not hit batsmen count as a -1 on the Bill James formula. And Kerry Wood's game I knew was the highest all time at 105. I am sure in the era before Keith Law yelled at college coaches that someone's thrown, a 12-inning one hitter with 18 strikeouts that would top this in game score. But I would be surprised if there was ever a 9-inning performance in college that topped that. And certainly there has never been one that was a 9-inning performance in the NCAA tournament. I know there's in particular one, I think it was like I know Fitty referenced it on Twitter afterwards. There's one legendary performance.
The kid at Oregon State, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where Alec or something like that, where he threw like a 12-inning gem or an 11-inning gem. But in the modern era, nothing's come close to this. I mean, to miss this, and I really wish that I'd flown down and attended it. I wasn't feeling that way Friday night, but Saturday I really wish I had flown down and attended it, because to be in attendance at a sporting event where you can say that that's really one of the truly greatest performances in history. And I immediately compared it to Shane's performance on senior night. I don't think Shane's performance on senior night can come close to this. I mean, he put a team on his back, but and he hit 9 threes in a row, if I recall correctly. But this was, a Heraclean effort. This is something that you don't see at any level. And then that's Kumar for you.
Yeah, I'm not going to throw any shade on what Shane did because he doesn't deserve it. That was an incredible performance, but that just took it to a new level. I've probably seen, maybe a couple of thousand baseball games in person or on TV. That's the first time I've ever seen a no-hitter from start to finish other than a 7-inning no-hitter in a minor league game. And that's one thing that was always on my bucket list is I wanted to see a no-hitter. I just never thought I'd see it in that spot.
So I attended the Astros 7-pitcher no-hitter, which was 14 years ago Wednesday, I believe. The Astros no-hitter at Yankee Stadium, where Roy Oswalt came out with an injury in the first inning, and 6 additional pitchers finished it off. And that was something to behold. But that's an entirely different animal than what Kumar did.
Yeah,
what Kumar did is something akin to, I don't even know if you can put Wilt Chamberlain scoring 100 on it, because with Wilt Chamberlain scoring 100, there's an element of gimmick to it, in that at some point you're just going after the number. In this, It's a man versus a tide of improbability. And in this instance, Kumar played Moses and prevented anything from happening or disrupting his purpose, which was to completely shut down the opposition.
No hitters are sort of fluky things by nature because you and I know about the randomness of batted balls falling in for hits, and you can make a great pitch and have a guy flare one off the handle just inside the foul line for a double, and then the guy hit one 404 feet to straight center about as hard as you can hit a ball, and that's an out, and the other one is a hit. But the more you strike out, the less flukish it is, and there were only two pretty well hit balls against him to begin with. But hey, for the interest of time, because we've got a lot of draft stuff to talk, I'm ready to get to mailbag if you're at that point.
Yeah, the only thing I'd just note very quickly is our Sunday starters have been announced. Drake Fellows for Vanderbilt versus Reed Detmers. Reed, first team All-American consensus basis. I think he had about 130 Ks in 80 innings. An elite prospect, a lefty, relatively low ERA. I think it's around 2.4 or something like that. What I would note is that he's not been stellar of late. I think he only has 2 or 3 quality starts in his last 10. Now those starts that aren't quality starts, a bunch of them were because he couldn't get to 6 innings, and a bunch of them were 4 or 5 runs. But it is an elite lefty. I don't know that it isn't what Vanderbilt's already seen before and faced in. If I'm picking the top lefties in college baseball this year, I'm probably going with, guys like Duxakis, Lacey, Ethan Small, and Detmer is there, but I don't know that he's, something that Vanderbilt hasn't seen before. But it'll obviously be a challenge for a lefty-heavy lineup. And then the other matchup on Sunday will be Ethan Small versus Jake Owen for Auburn. So a very familiar half of the bracket in Omaha. And Vanderbilt has been 6-0 this year versus this half of the bracket, 2-1 versus the other half of the bracket, that being represented by Arkansas.
I looked it up. Detmer struck out 162 and 107 and a third. Now, I have read up on him a little bit. His fastball sits low 90s, I think 91, 92. He relies on movement and off-speed pitches. I think he's got a really good breaking ball. Is that a scouting report that concerns you?
I mean, no more than Ethan Small, who held us to 1 run, and Asa Lacey and John Duxakis, who we actually did eventually get to second time through the order. You're facing an All-American, but you're not typically facing crummy pitchers at this point. You get to this level, you're facing the best, and I would look at it the other way: is there is not an offense as good as Vanderbilt's, and in this country, and especially if Amar and DeMarco are swinging the bat well, they provide a little bit of protection in the lineup by breaking it up some, and hopefully they get going, and we'll see. But yeah, you're facing a first team All-American. I don't care if it's Sean Kelly or if it's Reed Detmer. It's a tough task, but you're not facing any. Richie Goodenow is not walking out of the other side of that dugout. You're not going to get a soft tosser throwing junk in Game 1 of a College World Series.
Let's go to the mailbag presented by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Do you need an insurance agent who wants to know your unique needs and circumstances and will tailor an insurance plan to fit them? Josh is your man. Call him 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He's my agent. Give him a shot. I think you'll be pleased. He has done a phenomenal job for me. Baseball Bros asks, are any of the commitments who haven't yet signed expected to sign? Where will this class end up with the ones that do make it to campus? To reset, the Commodores have had 3 high school players sign Fletcher did this morning. Trey Fletcher, Anthony Volpe did a couple of days ago. He was the first, and in between Kendall Williams. So, any more expected losses from this class, New York Dore?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's probably a number one class, depending on one signing. I think if somehow the Mets can't sign Hunter Allen, we'll lose Blaine McIntosh, and with Hunter Allen, pardon me, it's Matt Allen, but with Matt
the Florida
Allen
commit, right?
Yep, with Matt Allen and Hunter Barco, there's a chance that Florida could inch ahead of Vanderbilt, but I think that in all likelihood, this is probably a number one class, and I just want to pull up again, who were the draftees who were picked, although it looks like my internet might be down at the moment. But, Jack Leiter's not signing. Blaine McIntosh is sort of an interesting situation in that he's a little bit of a lower profile recruit. He was one of the last recruits to come in. There was not a lot of information on him. But when he signed, I know I had a conversation with you, Chris, and with Mahaffey saying, look out for this kid, because this is a kid who was added to an already full and complete class. I think he was commit 19, if I recall correctly. Commit 18 or 19. And his profile was a speed demon at 6'4", and he's got, near 80 speed is what I've heard. The bat's a little raw, but he's an outfielder who has a really, really high upside. Was taken by the Mets in the 13th round, if I recall correctly. And the Mets situation is a little weird. So they had 3 draftees in the first 3 rounds. Batty was a high schooler. Matt Allen in the 3rd round, who was, by some accounts, the top high school right-handed pitcher in the draft, and had a very high price tag. And then I think a college player in the 2nd round. And other than that, they picked all seniors from round 4 to 10. That included Jake Mangum out of Mississippi State. The intention was to try and sign at a discount their 1st and 2nd round picks, sign at a bargain basement price, including bonuses as low as $1,000 for their 4th to 10th round picks, and get those savings and try and convince Matt Allen to sign for somewhere, north of $3 million, but under the $4 million that he was asking for. They think they can do it. The numbers mean that they might have room, but Allen's going to have to come down a little from his ask. If they do not sign Allen, they drafted aggressively in rounds 11 through 15, including with Blaine McIntosh. So he would be an overslot sign, but he would only sign if Allen fails to sign. If Allen signs, the Mets won't have money to sign Blaine McIntosh, because McIntosh isn't going to go for $125, which would be the most the Mets could pay him otherwise. The other guys who were drafted, Spencer Jones was a late draftee of the Angels. He's coming to school. Max Romero is a really, really impressive catching prospect. He was drafted by the Reds. He's coming to school. Parker Nolan was drafted late by the Marlins, one of the top bats, and I think, like McIntosh, is going to be a kid who flew a little under the radar, but is going to be someone who could be a high-end producer. For in the case of Nolan, it's at 3rd base. So looks like I think all of them will get through, with McIntosh being the only question mark. We've seen a lot of guys who have gotten through because they weren't drafted, and there are some that we should be really, really exciting about. I think Carter Young, for example, is a very, very strong possibility that he's starting either at second base or shortstop next year. Michael Doolin is a guy who I think is going to be an impact arm as long relief or sort of middle relief role. He's a proven strike thrower, and just up and down the class, there's some really, really talented guys. So I think overall, likely this is a number one class. Could I see it slipping to the number 2 class? Yes. But it's a really impressive class.
VU65 has a question. I'm going to add my own subparts to it. He wants to know the chances of DeMarco and Duvall coming back. I will also add Philip Clark in there. And to add to that, does Volpe signing over Slot affect the Yankees with DeMarco, who picked him in the 17th round, of course?
It does, but I haven't actually looked at what their pool status is currently. I mean, one over Slot's not going to make a huge difference. Clearly, as a draft eligible sophomore, both DeMarco and Clark have huge amounts of leverage. I would operate under the assumption that we're losing Clark. I would operate under the assumption that we're probably going to lose Duvall. And if you had to make me guess right now, I would think that there are a lot of emotional reasons why Pat might want to play for the Staten Island Yankees, less than a mile or two from home during short season A-ball. But if you had to ask me, I would guess that Pat DeMarco would likely return unless the Yankees can pony up some serious cash, which I don't know that they'll be able to do.
Now, did I understand you saying you think Duvall will be gone? Did you mean Clark?
No, I meant both of them.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
I mean, I think Duvey has proven himself, and I think it's a risk to come back for a senior season. If you asked me in the first half of the season if I thought Duvall was going to get enough at bats to really stake a claim to a solid draft offer, I would say I'm not sure. Because if you look at his numbers, you really don't see much. And he didn't have enough playing time before really the second 2/3 of the season to really, demonstrate enough views for scouts to see what, close followers of the program over 3 years did see, which was a kid with serviceable defensive skills and who hits everything on the line and just hits into bad luck. But as the season's gone on, he's gotten ABs. He's put together a really solid season. I think he's something like 294 and 46 or something like that. He's got a lot of RBI. And he drives the ball. So, if he were to come back for a senior season, is his performance going to so significantly change? And granted, he will get a lot more reps at catcher, but is his performance going to so significantly change that he'll be able to get drafted at a high enough slot to provide more than he'll get in an optionality year, or B, be able to actually demand full slot for where he's picked? And those are relatively big question marks. So unless he gets undercut in an offer, I think he'd be in a pretty strong position to move on. Now that's not to say that that's certainly going to be the case, but that would be, my guess, looking as an outsider without the information and without knowing, what's happened. So looking at the Yankees, they went over slot for Volpe by $400,000. They went slot for TJ Sikkema, which I think, by the way, is a great draft pick to get him at 38. I think he's going to be a really, really good pitcher. He was actually one of the more challenging lefties we faced this year. He was the senior out of Missouri. They went slightly over slot for their third rounder, which was Jacob Samford out of Western Kentucky. And they have not saved a whole lot of money on rounds 5 through 10. That's starting to make me feel like we're going to see Pat DeMarco return. I don't see the Yankees having the money.
This one from Doormonger, is it just me, or does Tim Corbin recruit kids who look like major leaguers when they step on the field? Big, strong, athletic kids, almost every one. In other words, very few look like they need a few years to mature and fill out.
Yeah, so we're gonna go back in the time machine on this one, Chris. What year was it that we played in the Atlanta Regional?
Oh, I knew where you were going before you said it. It was 2006, and that's the year that Corbin called their players donkeys, which they were. They had a 6'8" Matt Wieters. Can't remember was Matt Merton on that team? They just had big kids across the board.
Yeah, and that was the year that Pedro hit his 21st and 22nd homers, and we felt. Wait, do we beat them or do we beat them?
No, they got beat.
We lost.
Tech
Yeah, okay,
beat them in the Sunday night game.
I was confusing 04 and 06. That's right. That's right. And I remember conversations about how everyone on Georgia Tech was 6'1", 6'2", and Vanderbilt's team now, with the exception of your occasional Roe Coleman, everyone is just a monster. I mean, you look at the pictures that Vanderbilt rolls out, and you've got a number of 6'5" to 6'7" kids. Put it this way. One of the things that struck me, and I don't remember if I texted you this photo, Chris, was in the post game conference on Saturday night. There was an image of Phil Clark sitting next to Kumar Rocker, and Phil Clark looked like a midget next to him. And Phil Clark is not a small man. So there are just some huge kids on this squad. And I think that Vanderbilt, it's not just that they recruit big kids. It's also the way they shape the bodies. You look at Kumar Rocker when he showed up on campus and Kumar Rocker now, and you see a kid who's been through a serious weight training program. And this is to show the level of dedication that takes on Kumar's part. His dad's Tracy Rocker. This is not a kid who is sitting on his rear end eating White Castle and never hitting the gym. This kid is just now part of a serious weight training program that builds strength and builds a physique that can be intimidating. So, back in the day, you'd say, okay, this is the kid we want to get off the bus first to intimidate the opposition. Well, now you basically can roll out any order you want and you're intimidating.
I like how you were the first one on the podcast to work in a White Castle reference to Kumar. I've been hoping all year, it has not happened yet, that he and Harrison Ray come up big in the same game because the headline potential,
Harold
but it is
Kumar,
save the day or whatever. But
so
it has not happened.
I was using on Sunday the hashtag Hickman and Kumar go to K Castle. So there you go. Because Hickman actually, I think he struck out. Oh, he had
9 and 4. Yes,
9 and 4.
And would have been more had he been given the opportunity to roll out for the 5th.
Yeah. But yeah, that's So I tried, Chris.
Let's see. Theodore 8 says Omaha is a big park. Is this an advantage for a team like ours that is loaded with hitting talent but isn't quite as strong on the mound?
So, Vanderbilt has power hitters on this team, but they are gap hitters first. So, this isn't Matt Laporta, who's going to hit some bombs, but he runs at half speed. This is a team of athletes. And even guys like Phil Clark, who aren't exactly the fleetest of foot, aren't slow, and they're doubles hitters. So it's not like, Omaha being a place where home runs go to die as fly balls is something that necessarily will harm Vanderbilt. They tend to drive the ball more than hitting towering fly balls, with the exception of maybe Blade. But JJ is also a darn good hitter. I don't know that it harms Vanderbilt's offense. I would say it probably helps some of our pitchers who will be dealing with a lot more foul territory, and therefore will be able to get a few more outs. It will also help guys like, particularly Raby, who's a fly ball pitcher. Hickman also plays up in the zone, so he's a fly ball pitcher. Kumar and Drake, when they're on, are throwing pitches in the dirt. So you're not getting as many fly balls, as much as swing and misses and balls getting rolled over. But I would tend to think, with the athleticism we have in the outfield, that, all things equal, TD Ameritrade should be a net positive for Vanderbilt, much as Tim Corbin teams tend to be built to handle Hoover's dimensions quite well. With the cautionary caveat that, we've hit 87, 88, 89 homers this year, something like that. So we're clearly a team that's gotten it done with the long ball. But I don't think that's a defining characteristic where we've got, Rob Deers out there, with the exception of maybe Julian. But even Julian hit some doubles.
Yeah, a couple of quick things. Mason Hickman is the perfect pitcher for that park. It suits him so well. Go back and look up his box scores from the 2 games at First Tennessee. Now, granted, the opposition was not as strong, but fly ball park, he can just rear back and throw strikes, which he does anyway, but I think that empowers him to do it a little bit more. Second thing, and you saw this some at First Tennessee too. Now, sometimes you saw it play against them, but they've got kids like Blade and Infante who homered this year. Steven Scott homered there this year. They've got kids that when they get a hold of one, they're going to go out of any park. Now, I have seen it work against Paul and Blade at times too at First Tennessee. I think to right center, that's more severe there than it is in Omaha. And I think the balls that I saw those guys get called on the warning track at First Tennessee might get out of other parks. So it's interesting. It's to me, the thing home run park is sort of relative, because there's some guys that when they get all of one, it's going to go out anywhere. And I think to some extent that plays to Vanderbilt's advantage.
Yeah, and that's guys like, Scott, Clark, Blade. Usually when they hit homers, it's going a long way. The guys who might see homers turn into doubles. Ethan Pohl does a lot of his work, usually as doubles, but sometimes as homers, to left center. So you wonder if the ball gets into the gap there or gets held up for an outfielder. But all things equal, I think, Vanderbilt has a very athletic lineup, and teams that are fleet of foot tend to perform better in bigger ballparks. The one question, a lot of Vanderbilt's hitters tend to extend at bats by fouling balls off. We might see a few more of those foul offs get caught as foul pops.
Dore King wants to know your pitching rotation in Omaha.
Pretty simple. It's Fellows Sunday, Rocker Tuesday. It's very nice that Rocker gets 7-day break. 8-day break. 8 days of rest in between throwing 132 pitches in his next start. That alleviates some of the concern about having a higher pitch count. And then Mason Hickman, and Raby becomes my guy if anyone falters early. I can't recall, if we have to go to 5 games to get out of the bracket, i.e. if we lose game 1 or 2, we're in the loser's bracket and have to fight our way out. If we go to 5 games, you might need Raby under those circumstances. You probably don't want to bring Rocker back on short rest. But my guess is if that's the case, if we're losing game 1 or game 2, Raby may have pitched in relief, maybe not, but he may be held back if we don't win games 1 and 2, in which case you might see Ethan Smith get extended in an appearance, or Jake Heater.
Or you could bring Drake Fellows back potentially, and then maybe you start the championship series if you get there with Rocker and Hickman.
If you have, and I think you do bring Fellows back if you go to a game 4 out of the winner's bracket, but out of the loser's bracket and you go to game 5, I just don't see us bringing, Kumar back necessarily on short rest after throwing 132. You might, but I'd have to look at the calendar. We play Sunday, Tuesday. Loser's bracket game gets played on Wednesday. Then another game Thursday. You have another game Friday. So I don't see you bringing Kumar back on Friday after Tuesday, if that's the lineup. That Friday game might actually be Saturday.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean bring him back on 3 days rest. I meant bring Fellows in, and then you start.
Which would be the case if you have a 3-man rotation you could bring Fellows back for game 4 if you're holding Raby as a reliever.
Yeah, under that scenario, it'd be Rocker gets starts on Tuesday and then the following Tuesday. So I don't think that would be certainly not out of line. But anyway.
Yeah, no. I think, and just looking at let me just see the bracket here. I'm trying to find it, but why don't we just move on, because no need to belabor it. I mean, either Raby's a fourth man to pitch game 4, game 5, or you have him in reserve, and part of that might again be determined as to whether or not we take a loss in game 1 or game 2. And very quickly, game 1 is Sunday, game 2 is Tuesday, game 3 is Thursday, then Friday, Saturday. So there are days off after game 1 and game 2, which again means that Fellows could go Sunday, Friday. Rocker could potentially go Tuesday, Saturday with 4 days rest.
Yeah, I don't know that you want to do that, but it gets interesting at that point. A couple more questions so we can get out of here pretty quickly. Big Hatchie says, we're into June with over 50 wins. Is it safe to say spring potty training was successful?
I'm assuming spring potty training means the handful of really crappy pitching performances we had early in the season, as we were putting people in various positions. And yeah, I mean, that's part of the equation, and part of why you sort of look not at the overall staff numbers, but at the staff numbers of the people who are actually going to be pitching as the season comes to a close. And there is a big distinction there. I think I really thought Franklin was going to be one of the guys who was making a significant contribution down the stretch, and that really hasn't panned out, with the exception of the one Louisville game. So I'll own that miss. But that said, I think AJ still has a lot of talent. He got drafted, I think, in the 17th round, and I think he'll pitch some in Pro Bowl, and hopefully things go well. I think he's now at this point basically a blowout pitcher. And probably at this point a blowout only where we're on the losing side of it, as was the case in game 1 of the Supers. But yeah, I think it worked. And I think the interesting thing, if you look at, I tweeted earlier this week about the best seasons in Vanderbilt history, 1-loss wise. Right now, Vanderbilt's sitting at 54-11. The best prior record was the 2017 that went 54-12. So Vanderbilt has a very good shot of besting that. If it makes the College World Series finals, then 2013 was right there. Just give me one moment to try and find this tweet where I had it worked out. And pardon me, I've got a little frog in my throat, so let me just grab some water here. But all told, I mean, I think the team has really come together, and 30 of 32 is just really, really stunning.
Last question from Vandy Always. I like this one. Do you think Tyler Brown will be a starter next year?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think he's going to be a starter this summer. I've had some conversations, I know, with you and with others on Tyler Brown I've said in the past, he is a starting pitcher who happens to close. He is built like a starter. He has the endurance of a starter. And I think he will be a starting pitcher this summer on the Cape League. And it's there where he will make his draft money. In the fall series, he was not quite as spectacular as Kumar, but had a spectacular start against Oklahoma State. Next year, it's going to be, where is he most valuable? I think there are a couple of guys who are in that situation. Ethan Smith is another guy who's a starter who happens to be relieving now. And I think you can pretty much pencil in Kumar and Mason as Friday and Saturday in some order. I don't think it's actually necessarily 100% determined that Kumar is our Friday guy. I think Mason could very well lay claim to that role as well. The Sunday start is going to be very interesting. And I know, Chris, I had sent over to you, my early depth chart of who I thought was going to be in the starting mix. And let me just pull that up real quick.
Yeah, I know Brown, I think, was one of your three, was it not? Or was he your fourth, perhaps?
I don't think I put I don't think I necessarily.
I think you went Rocker, Leiter, Hickman is what you did. This is your guess.
Yeah, okay. So I had no, I did not have Leiter in the 2 spot. I had my starters Rocker, Hickman, and I did have Brown as number 3 on the depth chart. Leiter is number 4. Eater is number 5. Ethan Smith is number 6. Doolin is number 7. Huff is number 8. And that's not necessarily a prediction for what the starting rotation will be. I would, if I had to guess, I would say Rocker, Hickman, Brown is my most likely trio, but it's not a majority bet there. That's plurality. I think my next most likely would be Rocker, Hickman, Eater, and then Rocker, Hickman, Smith. I have Leiter starting the season in the midweek role. I most certainly could be proven wrong, and we could see Rocker, Hickman, Leiter, but that's my best guess if everyone's healthy of the starting trio or starting quartet. With pretty sure that Rocker, Hickman, and Leiter will all be starters. I just tend to think that Leiter is more likely to start in the midweek. And then, looking at closer, I think I have, even though I have Brown in the top 3 for the starting pitcher, I also have Brown as number 1 on the closer depth chart, followed by Fisher, Smith, and Jones. And Jones, just if he's fully healthy, he had a fracture in his elbow this spring, but he's a guy who is up to 93 to 95 and at the Perfect Game All-American Classic showed a really, really big breaking ball. Comes out a very difficult slot. He's 6'5", 6'6", lanky guy, real just power arm. Could be like an AJ Puck, could be like a Hugh Fisher. So that's one to watch.
They have had some ridiculously talented starting rotations on many teams, but I think that 1 through 6 or 7 of those options there, going that deep may take the cake of anything we have seen since Tim's been here.
I think that's right, and I think that it's not a stretch to say that even though you're losing one of the greatest warriors in Vanderbilt starting pitching history, in Drake Fellows, and the all-time winner in Vanderbilt starting pitching, in Pat Raby, as an overall crew, the potential starters next year will be better than the potential starters this year, and that's a scary thought. And hopefully, if the strike throwing is there, the relief staff will also follow suit. And just very quickly to humor the audience, I guess, my early guess at a depth chart for next year, the people who I have in the first 2 roles, I'm going to assume that both Clark and Duvall sign. So I'm going to put Dom Keegan and Romero as my 1 and 2 catchers. We will be going with all right-handed hitting catchers next year, unless Troy Lenev ends up in the catching role. I think he's more of an outfielder. I have Jason Gonzalez and Jahan Malloy as the first 2 on the first base depth chart, although John Malcolm is right there with them. And Spencer Jones could also see some time there. Also Parker Noland, I suppose. Second base, I have Harry Ray staying at second, and Carter Young as the number 2 on the list there, with Kolwick, Tate following suit in the 3 role. Third base, I'm keeping Austin Martin at third, Jason Gonzalez second on the list, Jahan Malloy and Parker Noland third and fourth, and Hayes potentially as the 5th man there. Shortstop, I have Carter Young being our starting shortstop. Followed by Kolwick and Maldonado. Maldonado's a very talented left side of the infield freshman coming out of New Jersey, sort of overshadowed by Leiter and by Volpe in New Jersey, but really, really elite pitcher, or rather player. Left field, I'm starting Cooper Davis in left, with Jahan Malloy backing him up as number 2 and Matt Hogan in the 3rd spot. In center, I'm starting Isaiah Thomas with DeMarco as the backup center fielder and Cooper Davis as third man on that list. I have DeMarco shifting from center field to right field. Again, this is assuming that he comes comes back to school. Thomas as number 2 in right field, and Spencer Jones and Chris McIlvaine and Troy LeNev rounding out the right field crew. DH, I'm going to assume that Gonzalez will possibly fill that. If Duvall is not back, I could easily see Jahan Malloy, John Malcolm, Spencer Jones getting some ABs there. But that's going to be principally driven by who's best at defense rather than who's necessarily the best hitter. So that's my early shot at a lineup next year. I think there will be more freshmen who get an opportunity to compete for playing time, even though Carter Young and Jack Leiter are the only 2 freshmen I'm projecting to start as in sort of a key role. Although I could certainly see Maldonado, Jones, Nolan, Doolin get some significant time.
My friend, I've got to run. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to doing one of these, hopefully as Vanderbilt's in the middle of an Omaha run if we can get together.
Outstanding.
All right, he's New York Dore. I'm Chris Lee. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast. We will be back with more of these next week.